are Latinos, when they're only 45% of our state population. This catastrophe has confirmed my assumptions of how government entities and health systems communicate. It sent the message to the Latino community that it can be considered an expendable workforce. There must be a stronger acknowledgement that the current social inequities require an immediate comprehensive strategy that's intentional about communities, much like the Latino community. Many of us that have been working on this have said, that are organizing the Latino community, said it's not just about the Latino community. If we don't understand how specific groups and populations can fall behind in a public policy, then it'll be someone next. It'll be the Southeast Asian community next. It'll be we already seen it in the African American community, and even more significant across the country.
Already seen it in the African American community. They know what it's like. They don't want to be there.
Let's finish it with this. There are many people who are uncomfortable when the discussion turns to race and ethnicity. But hasn't this catastrophe proved that race and ethnicity matters when you are drafting public policy?
Well, public policy is
the disastrous impacts of COVID on the Latino community, as you mentioned, I think the best way to categorize it or describe it is catastrophic. But it proves that it's a stark example of the consequences when not looking at policy through a racial and equity lens, and taking into account that ethnicity and race does matter. And we've already talked about
where's our voice?
There were fundamental gaps and impacts in communicating with communities. When I think about, say, my mother, she gets information from Univision, and when they talk about COVID, if we're lucky, if it's in a 3 to 5 minute segment on a daily basis. There's no Spanish newspaper outlets that we have here. The access to information for specific communities is very limited. So needing to understand that, I think, is critical. And if there's anything here that I think, and I'm thinking back when I was in college, Proposition 209 was on the ballot. And it took away this idea that we were going to be a colorblind state. But Proposition, which eliminated affirmative action, created a great disservice to California, where now government entities, business people are afraid to talk about race. And what is the outcome? It's the outcome in something like this pandemic affecting a population. So I hope that the voters will agree to repeal in November, I think it's Prop 16, the previous language in our Constitution.
Great.
Because the COVID data that's come out,
we all need to
the
vote for
COVID
Prop 16,
numbers show racial inequities that have proven to be not just inequitable, but unfortunately fatal.
Councilman Guerra, thank you so much for your time and for your service. Be well and be safe.
Thank you, Marcos. Great, and thank you for the Sacramento Bee for continuing to report on all the issues.
Okay, so to close our program, we have Jasper James. Jasper is the president of the Women's March Sacramento chapter, co-founder of the Women's March Black Leadership Action Coalition, and is co-founder of Activism Articulated, an advocacy communications firm in Sacramento. James is an author of the Black Bill of Rights, recently featured in an op-ed in the Sacramento Bee. Jasper, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, there are many gestures of solidarity being expressed by many people right now, including politicians. The mayor of Sacramento, for example, wants to eliminate a city ordinance that requires people to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance during public meetings. But isn't that more symbolic than a substantive plan to attack inequality?
Well, yeah, in a word, yes, but let's not discount the power of symbols either. I'm thrilled to see Confederate monuments tumbling down, but we need to make sure that those efforts don't stop there. They need to start there only.
Jasper, you've spoken before about the conflicts of interest that politicians have, conflicts that block needed reforms. Can you tell our viewers about those conflicts?
Well, I mean, the conflicts are really about the fact that when you are looking at things like the Police Bill of Rights or qualified immunity or police union contracts, you start to really get an interesting picture of what's happening on our local levels, because essentially all of these things combined create a certain amount of leniencies for police officers. And so when these contracts are signed, our local politicians that say yes to those things are essentially, putting us under the bus and understanding that our constitutional rights are going to be limited based on these particular doctrines and contracts. So
Amen.
then when you're starting to look at that, the conflict of interest really comes into, what police unions actually did campaign financing for the local leaders who said yes and agreed to these things. And that's an issue.
Following up on that, are there bad actors out there who are contributing to crafting laws that block or strip rights from Black communities?
Oh, of course.
Well, I'll tell you this, that, that could probably be its own town hall in and of itself. I think ultimately what we're looking at now is the real fight is with racist systems being run by generally well-intentioned people. We can't really focus on bad actors right now because we'll just chase our tails. So we have to focus on reimagining our systems.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give people a sense in terms of when you use the term qualified immunity? I'm not sure people know exactly what that means. Can you shed some light on that for people who are watching?
Sure. So qualified immunity was passed by the 1967 Supreme Court case, and it's essentially a doctrine. And that doctrine rules that during a civil suit, government officials should be shielded with immunity of personal liability while carrying out their duties. And that includes police officers as well. So in other words, you can't sue the cops if they assault you during arrest or invasion of your home because they're technically performing their official duties. So, in instances like the Breonna Taylor case, this is a perfect example. The reason why the officers who shot her while she was sleeping in her bed and never charged or brought into question is because essentially, based on qualified immunity, that officer did nothing wrong. So that's really the biggest issue, is that when the Supreme Court did pass this doctrine, they knew full well that what was going to happen in that instance is that our constitutional rights were going to be undermined. And when you know that Black people are disproportionately policed, the fact that implicit bias was now put into that conversation when this was put out there is just another bad example of bad judgment. And, the fact that our nation has consistently broken the social contracts between us and our nation and our communities, and it has to end.
Yeah.
Here's a question from viewer John Parker Jr. To understand racism exists, you have to believe it's real. What steps need to be taken for more people to believe it's real?
So yeah, when I first started going through the process of working on the Black Bill of Rights, I started with two things. One, it was looking at what police Bill of Rights were in play without the entire nation. So there's about 15 in the nation that are in effect right now. And, but the thing that really was impressed upon me was the historical perspective. And I think that that's really the issue right now, is that because we all know that the winners write history, and that's the reason why we see Confederate statues all over the place. And, people are trying to say, this is our culture, let's not erase our culture. This is not done on accident. It's because of the fact that we have been basically placated to see the version of history that the winners want us to see. And that history is a white supremacist history. But once you start going back to, I just went back to the 1700s, and I started to really go from there and go up the chain to when slavery was abolished and right on up to the present day. If you really start to look at the nuances and the context of all these things, our nation and the lawmakers have never stopped undermining Black people's rights. As soon as we had something on paper, they would take it away somehow, undermining it. So like, for example, a lot of people, slavery was abolished, by the 13th Amendment. But what a lot of people don't realize is that slavery was actually undermined and overturned in less than a year. And that happened because of the fact that Lincoln was assassinated. And so when Lincoln was assassinated, all of the things that he was putting into play were basically shut down. So what really happened then was that folks came in, Andrew Jackson became president, and then all of a sudden now we had black codes, we had vagrancy laws. And so essentially, we never received any type of reparations. I mean, I just don't even know how this is not a conversation that people are really trying to focus on unpacking right now, because it's what needs to happen. I mean, even the 40 acres and a mule, that wasn't a gift, that was a lease. And it was a lease on property that was crummy land. I mean, it was land that was passed over by the white landowners. That was what was given to the free slaves. And then they had to basically turn a profit within 2 years. And if they didn't turn a profit in 2 years, they would lose that land. Now, if they did turn a profit, then they would be able to have the opportunity to try to purchase the land in the third year. But, you know, by the time all of that was really said and done, that whole process, that campaign of 40 acres and a mule, ended within the year that it began. And basically only 2% of Black people really only received reparations.
Here's a question from viewer Harold Mosby. How can I tell if I am racist?
You're
Is he
entitled.
white?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, because essentially, here's the thing. As you had said, Marcos, at the very beginning, it's like we need to raise the bar in our country. And I think that, you know, when people are asking, what does this moment mean? You know, what do we do now? What's next? These are the things that are next. It's like, you know, we're done arguing with people who don't believe that white supremacy is real, white privilege is real, racism is real. It's real. You know, all you have to do is talk to a Black person, they will tell you that it's real. And, you know, I think how we undo these things is to basically, we need to raise the bar in general, as in our communities and in our nations. And if we do that, then we don't have to have this conversation. People just have to meet us where we are. And I think that's been the biggest issue, is that we constantly reach down to like pull people up. That's not what this is anymore. We're here. So you need to reach us here. There's racism, period. If you're white, you enjoy privilege. That's just what it is. It's not that you're a bad person, but now it's time for you to educate yourself. Read some books, find out the history and learn.
Viewer Jesse Burns asks, how can we keep this moment from being like past movements where not enough was done to achieve racial equality?
Sure. So, I mean, you know, I have mentioned the Black Bill of Rights, and I'm not going to get into it too much, but I'll just say that with the Black Bill of Rights, what came up for me is that I really understood the fact that we have constantly had to build all of our systems within a white supremacist construct. So that means that everything across the board, no matter what it is, education, healthcare, you know, personal financing, it's all done within this container of white supremacy. And because that's the case, that means that there's a level of toxicity for anyone who's not white in this system. So when we're talking about what's next and how can we like make this a different time and not go revert back to what's always been, is that we have to essentially build resources. Black people and our allies, we need to come together. We need to be on the same page. And for me, that's what the Black Bill of Rights does. It's a container. It's a container to take everything out of the white supremacist container that we've been in and working in for the past 400 plus years, and looking to see how we can actually reimagine for the first time in our history, collectively, what would these systems look like if they were really, truly equal? Like they were there so that Black people could be safe. They're written so that we can have and acquire the things that we need and desire. And I think, honestly, the term reparations gets a bad rap. And I think that we have to really understand that it's time to unpack that and pull away the taboo from that, because the United States has paid reparations before. And, you know, I like to say it like this. The white people are like the engine, but all of the millions of gallons of Black blood that has been spilled, and indigenous blood that has been spilled to build this country, and then essentially be put into a place where we're governed by, we're in two systems, but we're governed by one. So now we're sitting here, we're the labor class, we're propping everything up. But let's put it this way. you can have the best type of engine possible, but if you don't have gas, you're not going anywhere. And the thing is that we've never come to terms with this as a nation. Like, we have to heal this rift, and we have to give the responsibility of governing back to the people who deserve to have it. Because if we're going to be living in two systems, and we're going to be judged on within these two systems, then what are we doing? Why are we not looking at the fact that we should not be governed by a system that is not for us? We should not be governed by a system that looks to completely divorce us from the process of what our budgets are being put towards within our communities. Like, this is just unacceptable. It shouldn't be happening anymore. And so when I talk about reparations, this is an important conversation, because reparations really, for me, is understanding that reparations can start within the system. So, for instance, Katie had mentioned the people's budget. That's a perfect example. People's budget, that sounds like a reparations budget to me. That seems like every community should be actually looking to put in a reparations budget. Okay, so now that's the case. Now we go to our schools. What do our schools do? Our schools also put together a little piece of budget so that we can start to build. We have to build the infrastructure for Black people again, because we know throughout history, people in our nation, our government has killed every single person who is trying to uplift our Black communities. Our government has undermined every single thing that we tried to do. Our government has brought in drugs into Black communities. They're throwing our people into incarceration in unquestionable amounts for profit. And I think that it's high time that we just really focus on the real main issues. The issues right now is that in this generation, we have two things that we're looking at. We're looking at the police and how the police are getting away with killing Black people. And that's because of the fact that there were things like qualified immunity doctrines and the police bill of rights and the police union contracts. So every single community in this nation right now needs to be going to their public officials and holding them accountable. We need to understand what's going on in these back rooms, because a lot of these things are being signed in back rooms. They should be public. There should be complete transparency, and there's not. And if our local leaders were really about being supportive for this new movement of Black lives, they would have no issue. They would have no issue with having transparency. And they would also understand the context that why would they sign a contract that gives leniencies to police officers when they know full well that in the event that they kill an innocent Black citizen, that person is essentially going to go free? We don't even have to go to trial. And that's the part of this that every community member needs to understand in every single city, in every single state of this nation. We need to educate ourselves, and then we need to understand how to hold our local leaders accountable.
Jasper, thank you so much for your time and for being an important voice in our community.
Thank you.
This concludes Breaking Point, Tackling Systemic Racism in Sacramento. As your host, I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us today. Thank you to you, the viewers, for watching and for reading the Sacramento Bee. This is Marcos Bertone, columnist for the Sacramento Bee. I wish you a pleasant afternoon. Be safe.
Thank you. Breaking Point. So I will say, sign on and follow the Sacramento Bee, and stay tuned and subscribe and follow and become educated in regards to the concerns of what's happening in our local community, because we all pay. We just have to all be represented in the same way. So until I see you again, this is Darlene Anderson. Follow me on YouTube or follow me on Facebook or Instagram. Until we see each other again, signing off.